Greetings, and welcome to The Thirsty Mage, the preeminent podcast for RPG and alcoholic beverage discussion. I'm your host, David Lloyd, and this episode we go back to a mage favorite series, Final Fantasy. Thanks to the flood of ports released on Switch, we've had a grand old time replaying some of our favorite Square titles, and to finish off our coverage, we have an episode devoted to the last port currently available on Switch, Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age. Before we kick things off, let's see who's on our episode tonight. He is one half of the Talk Nintendo podcast, and the pub's aqua aficionado, Mr. Casey Gibson.
Howdy ho, yes, it is the most recent port, but I know not the most anticipated with Final Fantasy VIII. I know that's going to be, we might break the record, that's going to be like a 6-hour podcast of just David gushing.
I'll have to check in periodically to make sure nobody has left the call.
No one else has talked for 3 hours. It's like everyone's falling asleep, but David just keeps on trucking.
Yeah. And rounding out our panel, he is reviews editor for Nintendo World Report and currently on call at a moment's notice for his second board, Mr. Jordan Rudick.
I play the leading man. Who else, David?
Sorry.
I'm just gonna fill this episode with Balthier quotes because I love the guy so much.
Oh, he is awesome.
It's funny, like, of all the things I remember about Final Fantasy XII, like, he is by far the thing that sticks out to me the most. The element of that game that really caught my attention. Every scene that he's in, I think he steals, and his dialogue and voice actor, I just love the guy. But yeah, we'll get into the more Balthier gushing later on, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there'll be no shortage of it. That's for sure. All right. Well, maybe we'll get started here with the drinks, and Mr. Gibson can let us know what brand of aqua he's got tonight.
Well, this is good old-fashioned tap water, but it has been run through the Brita filter, so it's purified. It's tasting crisp. Yeah, despite it being the 4th of July, just keeping hydrated. And yeah, I do apologize for any dog barking you might hear in the background. Fireworks will be going off, and that little pup's going to be barking, so.
No worries. Well, it's fitting to have fireworks for maybe one of the best Final Fantasies ever.
Ooh, yeah, hopefully maybe we'll get some loud boomers that we'll be able to pick up on mic.
That's right.
It's certainly the one that you've given the highest review score to, David. So,
yeah, holy
so
moly.
So far, that's right.
Until I figure out how to give an 11.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the Brita filter, Casey, because I used to have one growing up. We had a Brita filter, and I used to love that water, man. Just down it by the gallon, the bucket load. And I recently picked one up for my new place. I got one of those big, like, 10-liter pitchers or something like that, and I'm drinking so much more water now because it just tastes so much better that way than straight from the tap.
Oh yeah.
I'd almost forgotten how good filtered water tastes compared to just straight off the tap. So I'm totally with you there. For my own drink, David's going to be really pleased because I'm going to talk about something alcoholic tonight. And cue the fireworks right now.
I was just
right?
gonna say, where's those fireworks?
That's right. Very good. Your dog is a funny bark there, Case.
Yeah, you should get that checked out.
I think so. So the drink that I've got today, and is one that I was kind of toasting Canada on July 1st with, is Pim's Cup. And Pim's Cup is a drink that I've kind of have had a long time. I had a long time ago, and I'd kind of forgotten about it. But I don't know where or when I got introduced to it again. But I've started drinking that over the last couple months. So Pim's Cup is a cocktail made with Pimm's, which is kind of a gin-based liqueur. I think it's 25% alcohol content. It's kind of a spice, citrus flavors to it as well. Very light and perfect for the summer. Maybe that's one of the reasons I've kind of brought it back recently. Is again, it's a good drink for when it's hot out. In a Pim's Cup, you put a little bit of Pimm's. Ginger ale is what I like to have, and then cucumber as well. I'm just going to mix that all up. Put lots of ice in it too. So Pim's Cup is my drink of choice today. We'll have to make some special note in the episode that everyone should download this one. It's the one where Jordan actually drinks alcohol.
Yeah, it's a banner episode.
That's right. Yeah, we're celebrating two fine countries' birthdays this week. So I had to let my hair down a bit.
That's right. Well, for Final Fantasy XII, since they changed up the formula and started some new things in the series, I thought I better pull out my beer table of elements and find a new type of beer that I've never tried before. So I narrowed it down to a barley wine type beer, and I can't recall. I might have had one before, but I can't recall. It's kind of in my wheelhouse because it's a medium amber. But the barley wine that was easily attainable was through Mill Street. So it's a pretty big brewery in the Ottawa area. And so the one I went with is the Mill Street barley wine. It's an 11% medium amber, and it has a rich caramel malt. And barley wines are traditionally from England, and they're meant for joyous occasions. So I figured, just like you said, Jordan, with Canada Day and America Day, it just made sense to have something that to celebrate a joyous occasion. And
we're gonna need you to drink like 3 of those, and then by the end of the episode, you'll be feeling real good.
It always feels good to drink beer, let me tell you.
I'm just glad we're back to a double-digit alcohol content in your beers, David. I think we'd missed that for a little while.
Yeah,
so
I mean, it wasn't me who was saying it,
10%
but
or above.
people claiming your shit was weak.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
they're
starting 8%, 7.5%. What is this
what
crap?
A baby. Yeah.
They're asking who's the real aqua aficionado.
Yeah.
He's only drinking 7.
Yeah.
That's right.
I thought he was a real Canadian.
Yeah, that's right. Alrighty, well, as we've said, the episode topic tonight is Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age. We're going to focus in on the Switch port that recently came out. So the original Final Fantasy XII came out for PlayStation 2 back on October 31st, 2006. And I actually remember, it's stuff that's old I don't usually remember, but I actually do remember picking this up on launch day because I was so excited for the newest Final Fantasy. And it's funny, I still remember my reaction when I first started playing it because it was... I remember at the time I really didn't know anything about it. I wasn't really like looking up on the web or reading magazines or that sort of thing. All I knew was the Final Fantasy was coming out, and the bitter disappointment when I found out that there were no random encounters in Final Fantasy XII. Oh man!
Yeah, how times have changed, huh?
Yeah. It was. I just the thing I remember the most was just being bitterly enraged that they had changed the formula on me.
They might as well have put this on mobile.
Careful, Casey. They might still do that. So let's not encourage them. I kind of had a similar reaction, David. I don't know if I played it right at launch. I probably played close, maybe within a year of the launch. And yeah, I had the same kind of feeling. I played FF10, I believe, probably a little bit of 10 too, and those were still fairly traditional Final Fantasy games. But then you get to FF12 and the combat, the enemy encounters, the kind of maybe the more open worldness of it, and especially the gambit system. They were just elements I was not at the time. I was not interested in that. I think I'd be about 21 at the time. Still very much in my turn-based. That was what I was expecting from my Final Fantasy games, right? I didn't play a lot of other RPGs where it's maybe more action-based or something like that to that point. So, I was kind of turned off of the game at the original release. I probably only played maybe a few hours. One thing I did want to point out is that this game came out October 31st, 2006. This was basically a month before PS3 would launch in Japan and North America. So you have this game coming at the end of the PlayStation 2, not the end of the life cycle, but pretty close to it, with a new console on the horizon. So to me, the Final Fantasy XII was never a game that I was getting hyped up for. I was probably thinking more about the new console generation coming up and what new games those were going to bring, right? So kind of a funny time to get a big flagship Final Fantasy title at the very end of the PlayStation 2's life cycle. So just something I noticed
I was
there.
going to say, especially such a beefy title, right? I mean, without the ×3 speed, this has probably got to be, a 60 to 80 hour game, give or take?
Oh, easy. Yeah. There's so much to it already, so...
Yeah, and the Zodiac version brought a lot of improvements that just made it easier to beef up your characters. And so the Zodiac version, which is what the Switch port is based on, came in July 11th, 2017. And it actually skipped the PlayStation 3 altogether and went to the PlayStation 4.
Probably not a bad move.
Yeah, that's right. I remember getting I actually got that for Christmas. And I don't think I ever actually opened the box.
A beautiful shelf.
You still haven't opened the box, right? It's still unopened on your shelf.
Oh, well, actually, I did end up opening it for the
Okay.
comparison video.
Right.
Yeah. So I wanted the PlayStation 4 versus the Switch. So it did get open. I actually do think that's when I opened it.
A worthy gift then. It just took a couple years.
That's right.
I'll be honest with you, David. It's probably entirely worth it because I was on YouTube searching for Final Fantasy XII reviews, and I couldn't find your actual review, but I did find your comparison video. So that, for whatever reason, that your gameplay video, your comparison video made the list, yeah. But the review must be for a little bit further down. So
YouTube saw it was a 10, and they were like, "We better bump this down the list a little bit."
Yeah. This guy's trolling us clearly.
Yeah, we don't want troll reviews showing up top.
Yeah, no one was talking me out of that 10, let me tell you.
No.
So the Switch and Xbox One, the version that we're discussing tonight, it came out April 30th, so not that long ago. And these versions are an improvement on top of the improvement. There's some differences in the Switch and Xbox One version that did not appear in the PlayStation 4 Zodiac version. So it's and very useful as well. I think the biggest improvement or the biggest addition in my view is the ability to reset your license board. I think that's the big addition between the three. And one of the things that we've seen with Square ports is that there always seems to be a compromise. Like all the Switch versions, at least at launch, they all had a compromise, whether it's the music bug or I believe the Final Fantasy VII had like a delay or maybe Final Fantasy IX had a delay when the battle started. There's always like something. I remember seeing that list of like the different problems that each one was having. But Final Fantasy XII is the one port where the Switch clearly got the best version of the port.
I was gonna say you would easily be able to say it's the definitive version, right? I mean, because graphically it's gonna look pretty similar, if not the same, to the PS4 and Xbox version. You got the portability, and then of course just all the bonuses, like the ×3 speed and all that jazz.
Exactly.
I do think there is one thing to note about the Xbox One version. I think it also got upgraded to 60 FPS. I'm not sure if the PlayStation 4 version is 30. My guess it is. So the Xbox in April when the Switch port came out, the Xbox One also got the same upgrades, but also got a frame rate bump as well. So if people were going to play it there, that's not a bad thing for a game like this either.
Yeah, I guess it's portability versus the higher FPS, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of Final Fantasy XII, we'll just briefly talk about the designers. It's kind of the regular cast and crew that you usually see on a Final Fantasy title to a certain degree. The original director or co-director was Yasumi Matsuno. So he originally was co-directing with Hiroyuki Ito. But had to leave during the development because of failing health. I guess he had been having health problems for a while leading up to that point. And a lot of the concept and plot was based on work that he had done. A lot of Final Fantasy XII was based on Final Fantasy Tactics, which also included Ivalice. That's
the shared world, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when he left, Ikitashi Kawazu ended up taking over in his place, and he's best known for being a part of the Saga series. And so him and Ito ended up finishing up what Matsuno had started. But based on what we saw, it was, like I said, originally when I first played the game, I definitely was upset at the changes. But I guess I don't know if it's just because I'm older and can appreciate it more, or maybe because of the way that Final Fantasy has evolved through up into 15, that the changes don't seem as drastic as maybe they did at the time. But I definitely have to say that I think Matsuno and Aito did a pretty good job setting up not only the concept and the plot, but even just all the battle mechanics and tactics and overall gameplay.
Do you know how far along they were in development when he was, had to leave the project because of the health issues? Because I'd imagine that'd sort of be a tricky situation, especially for the team to have like the all right, we've got this one vision, and then all of a sudden they are removed, and now someone else is coming in and sort of leading the ship, and sort of how the team would react to that,
Yeah, I remember I read the article. There was an article on GameSpot that actually announced that change in the people that were working on it and the reasons behind it. But I didn't catch exactly how far along. Like, they're far enough along that I think like the vision that he had was probably close to what he was looking for by the end. But it was funny in my research too. There was a funny comment from Sakaguchi who had said that he wasn't going to play it now as soon as he found out that Matsuno was no longer involved.
I'm out.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
So it was funny so there was at least one person that was upset that Matsuno couldn't finish it. But yeah, it was hard to tell exactly like percentage wise how far along they had gotten with him. Some of the other people that were working on the project is the lead artist was Akihiko Yoshida, who is another Big Square personality. He's currently doing the character design for Final Fantasy XIV. He was the character designer for Nier Automata. And one funny thing that I saw was that he's actually doing the artwork for a Kickstarter title called Unsung Story, which was created by the aforementioned Yasumu Matsuno. So that's what Matsuno's up to these days. He's kicking off or doing Kickstarter games in the vein of the old Final Fantasy style. So
that sounds awesome, and he's bringing back the boys.
That's right. Yeah, Unsung Story has officially been put on my radar now. Based on who's working on it.
This is one of those funny things that you get these names and you hear about them and working together, and then years later they end up working together again, right? Like, yeah, like you said, Case, like bringing the old boys back together. I think it's one of those cool things that happens, especially with role-playing games, just because you think about how long these guys spend working on these games and all the different elements. So for them to work together for so long, obviously they're forming good relationships, good rapports with each other. Unsung Story is one of those things that I think it's been... I think it's been in development a long, long time, and I know that there's probably some impatience waiting for that one. It's not the first Kickstarter game to take forever to come out, but I do think Unsung Story. One thing I was reading about that recently is that at the very least, that Kickstarter project is being a little bit better with updates. Like, it seems to be giving more regular updates about the progress and how things are coming along and maybe when the game is coming out. So, yeah, definitely one of those games that we've been waiting for a long time. I don't think any of the three of us kickstarted it, but we do know about that game. So it'll be interesting to see what it ends up becoming, or if it ends up working out for them. We'll see.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be better than the last game that we found out right near launch that we got excited for, and somebody on this podcast built it up and it disappointed.
Hold on, what game are you talking about? I'm so lost.
So somebody who a week before Ni no Kuni 2 came out, going on about how great it was.
Oh man.
Casey?
Wait, about Ni no Kuni?
Yeah, I was having flashbacks of like when we realized that a game that actually sounded interesting was just about to come out. I think it was like a week before it came out. You had found out it was coming, and we both got excited about getting it, and then we finally get it, and we were so disappointed.
Yeah,
I'm hoping this isn't. I'm hoping Unsung Story ends up being. Doesn't become a Ni no Kuni fiasco.
A Ni no Kuni 2 fiasco, we should say, because
we should be very clear about that.
The first one, Man, what a dumb decision to release that game in September, like a week before Dragon Quest. And like, oh god, because I really want to play that game, but it's totally gonna get.
I want you to play it, Casey. I really want you to play it at some point. It is excellent. The first one is so good.
That might be like a post Dragon Quest XI. I need a new RPG. Okay, like let me dip back into this, but.
There you go.
If I get the review for the site.
Yeah, that's right. I see a future where Casey reviews it and he's like, redemption.
Yeah. If you thought Nino,
I told you it was good.
Or Casey reviews it and he's rushing through it to get ready for Dragon Quest, and he can't enjoy it at all.
I hated it because it delayed my time with Dragon Quest XI. 2 out of 10.
And the last gentleman that we'll talk about for the designers, there is Hitoshi Sakimoto, who is the composer. So in 2006, he was in charge of doing the music because Nobumatsu had left Square in 2004, and he did contribute one song to Final Fantasy XII, but the majority of the soundtrack was arranged by Sakamoto, with contributions from Hayato Matsu and Masahiro Awada. The last two gentlemen, I think they contributed like 7. I think Matsu had about 7 songs and Awada had 2 songs, but the majority of it was Sakamoto. And I don't know about you guys, but I enjoyed the music. I don't know if I would place it in like my top Final Fantasy music, but it was enjoyable nonetheless.
Yeah, I think it's missing that Uematsu kind of that flair, that charm to it. Maybe just didn't seem as memorable to me. Probably fine. Like I didn't think it was bad or anything like that. I think the battle themes are actually pretty good. But there's a funny thing as well that when you're doing the combat in the open world, it's just the background music of wherever you are when the combat takes place, right? There isn't a standard
totally
combat
noticeable
theme.
Too.
So yeah, you notice it a lot because you might be getting into a fight and the music in the background is very peaceful or somber. It's not kind of that upbeat battle music you're used to, and I think that to me that hampered my enjoyment a little bit, because I really look forward to the battle themes in role-playing games, and for this one to only have a specific one during boss fights was a little bit of a letdown. I think.
It sort of reminds me like with a problem with the Breath of the Wild soundtrack, right? It's like it works perfectly for what the game is, but it's just you miss those sort of iconic dungeon themes, and I think it's sort of similar with this. Yeah, when you just get into like random battles, you don't get that special battle music to get the adrenaline rushing, and like you said, the soundtrack, and I should be clear that I haven't beaten this game. I think I clocked in around 12 hours ish, but so I'm sure there's still plenty of music that I had not heard yet. But from what I did hear, it was solid. Like, definitely good music. I enjoyed it. But, it just doesn't have those memorable tunes that sort of get stuck in your head for days to come. Or those, like, oh, I haven't played this game in a year, and suddenly I'm just thinking of this song, where I've totally had that with other Final Fantasy games.
There was one thing, Dave, I just want to interrupt you quickly. Just a little note about Uematsu leaving Square. Apparently, part of that, at least some of the videos or research I was doing today, it was related to Square relocating their head office, so they moved to maybe a different city or a different part of Japan. And I think it was something he maybe didn't want to do. He was happy where he was. But I also think he wanted a little bit more autonomy. I think he wanted to be doing his own stuff, or maybe just have a little bit more freedom. I think it's one of the reasons why he left in 2004, and ultimately didn't kind of finish or add his signature touch all over this soundtrack. That's why we got Sakamoto instead.
Yeah, it makes sense, because I mean he had been there for a long time, and that's kind of around the time when a lot of the upper management guys were kind of taken off to do their own thing.
Right.
There was a bit of a changing of the guard around that time, so it that falls right in line. And I was even thinking with the music, like I think one of the reasons why the music doesn't change is the whole no random encounters. So because you're not leaving the area, like you're still So you'll just be walking in the overworld, and wherever you are, there's like a theme for that area. But because there's no transition to the battle, I can see their thought process behind, well, there's no transition, so there's no transition of the music.
Oh yeah.
Like
that makes sense.
Sort of
Yeah.
that was my connection with Breath of the Wild too. It's like it works. Like I totally understand why they made those decisions, and it works well in that context. But it is still something that ultimately you end up missing a little bit.
Well, and it's too bad they couldn't do something like and I totally agree with you with Breath of the Wild. One of the things Breath of the Wild does do good is with the Guardians. Like, even though the music, like where you are, is not changing, when you get close to a Guardian, the music, like the Guardian itself, yeah, they have their theme like that.
It's perfect actually too. It's so menacing and so threatening. And to contrast that with like the soft piano that plays in the overworld when you're just running around, and then a Guardian shows up, like it's on at that point, right? You got to get ready for this, which is really great.
Yeah, it's too bad they couldn't when you get close, when you start getting closer to an enemy, maybe the tempo speeds up. Like there might not necessarily have to be that change to something like to like the battle theme, but even if they could do something with the overworld music of
like a riff on it,
increasing, yeah, exactly, like just kind of transition, like as you get close to an enemy, maybe the tempo picks up, or maybe the octave drops, or something that just kind of signifies like, oh, you're about to get into a battle, and then that could be kind of the transition. But it's really missing the battle theme of to give that ambience of being in a fight.
I was just curious about if Sakamoto, I was going to ask you, David, and I ended up looking it up, if Sakamoto had worked on anything else before or after FF12. And hilariously, maybe, he actually worked on a bunch of the soundtracks for the Final Fantasy Tactics games. So it looks like he was part on the soundtrack for the original and also the Game Boy games as well, Tactics Advance and Final Fantasy Tactics A2. Also, Tactics Ogre, and some more recent games, Dragons. Oh gosh, I just lost it. Dragon's Crown, I believe, which is kind of like a brawler. And Odin Sphere, I think it's Life Thrasher, Leftizer. I don't know. It's got a funny name to it. But
heard that one. Actually,
you know the name. Yeah.
Yeah.
God help us with trying to pronounce it, but so he's clearly been around like other games. It's just funny that he's also been a composer for other games set in that Ivalice world too.
Well, and it's funny because Final Fantasy Tactics has like an out of this world soundtrack.
It's very good. Yeah, I actually prefer that very much so to FF12.
That's totally one of those, like, I could go back and listen to that soundtrack, through the entire way, especially like the opening music for that, like the title music is, oh my god, it's so good, so good.
Yeah, well,
I'm not sure if he did the whole thing. It looks like I'm trying to find out if he was a composer. Yeah, so Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, he was a composer. Ogre Battle 64, he was a composer. That's an interesting one. Final Fantasy Tactics original soundtrack composer and arranger. Yeah, so he has his hands all over that the game set in Ivalice.
Well, and that makes sense because he would have worked with Matsuno in Tactics, so there's again that familiarity with the people making it. Yeah, it's a good transition to go into just like to talk about Ivalice, because Ivalice as an area or a kingdom, I think like that was definitely one of the highlights of Final Fantasy XII for me, was that when it comes to memorable areas, I think Ivalice is one of probably the most vibrant worlds that Final Fantasy has created. And I've never played Tactics myself. Like, do you see is it the map very similar to the Final Fantasy Tactics?
It's hard because Tactics, every time you get into a battle or an event, you get kind of that isometric tactics style view where you only see a very small square of land or a really small territory, right? Maybe you're on the side of a mountain or in a valley or in a house or something like that, or outside a castle, but you just see a small slice of the world, so you don't get as much of it as obviously compared to a much more open world game like FF12. So I think you can see similarities when you look at like the overworld map in tactics games, but just comparing the two overworlds, it's hard to say. I mean, I haven't played tactics in a long time either, so I'd maybe have to go back after playing this and see.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because like a lot of the time I didn't spend a ton of time in Rabanastre this time. So in Final Fantasy XII, like I guess I'll just do quick hit, like we'll get into the story later, but the quick and dirty of the story is essentially there's two large empires that are in the perpetual war, and then there's two small kingdoms in between that are kind of like in the no man's land, I guess, between these two kingdoms. And the main area is the capital. Oh, and the names escape me. The capital. I know the capital is Rabanastre for whatever reason. I can't remember the kingdom it's in. But yeah, the Rabanastre is like this main hub city where everything, like you start there and it's kind of like your sanctuary. It's like where you often will go back. It's where the main character Vaughn is from, and I just think it's beautifully designed. It just feels it feels like home. It feels good when you come back. You feel safe, and I just felt like the main strength of Final Fantasy XII, I think, is the world that you're running around in.
Rabanastre is capital of Dalmasca, David, is that
yes,
right?
Yeah, Dalmasca, that's right. And Galbrady, I think, is the...
They really throw a lot of names at you.
There's
real
a lot
quick,
of names.
Yeah. And it's like your head's sort of spinning like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
The only reason I can remember Dalmasca is because of the time when Vaughn goes around proclaiming to be Captain Bosch von Ronsenberg of Dalmasca. he keeps saying that over and over again. So like that line is like it burned into my memory, right? I actually hate that part. I think it's one of the times that I find Vaughn especially annoying. It's one of those. He's one of those funny kind of semi-protagonists of a Final Fantasy game that I find at times insufferable. I think he grows on you a little bit, but we'll talk more about him later. But yeah, Dalmasca, the territory where Rabanastre is found. I think you're right, David, about Rabanastre. I think it's a really kind of vibrant place. I think it's a really good opening city for the game. I think it sets up the narrative and sets up kind of your expectations of the game really well. It's a fun place to explore. There's a lot of places to go, and there's kind of like the underground area as well, which is kind of a little bit more shady, maybe a poorer part of the town, and then you have the various markets and stuff too. It is a really cool place to start the game.
Yeah, and it's the openness really contrasts the dungeons. Like you always find that the open, like the overworld open areas are these like great big expanses, but then as soon as you get into the dungeon areas or the areas that where like the big bads are, it feels like a basically the best way I can describe it is alleyways.
Yeah, it's a little claustrophobic when putting the two, like you said, going from like the vast open areas to the very tight corridors. It's pretty contradicting, you know.
Yeah, and I think part of that is again, I'm going to keep harping on these random encounters, because when you can see the enemies on the field, like in the big open fields, it's reasonably easy to avoid the enemies when you're in the open areas, because even if I remember a few areas where they've really got a lot of enemies and you can't necessarily completely avoid them, but you can outrun them. But in a lot of the dungeons, the alleyways just prevents it. So there's only so much avoidance you can do before you're forced into battle. And the dungeons are certainly designed to brawl your way in and out.
I mean, I think the claustrophobic nature of the dungeons works well. I mean, if you compare it to like something like FF10, where basically the whole game is an alleyway, right? There's very few open areas where you can run around. I mean, there's a couple later in the game, but FF12 you've got these big, huge open areas that are kind of connected in segments, and then when you get to a new one, a new area, it feels like you are in a totally new place, and like maybe there's this, it gives the feeling or the impression of this really big epic journey that you're going on. Whereas in FF10, like everything is so confined and tight that it doesn't feel like you're traveling that far at all. So I actually don't mind the contrast in FF12 with the smaller dungeons. One thing that I would find really frustrating, and I fortunately had the 3 times speed up or 4 times speed up in the Zodiac Age version, was I think the dungeons are pretty long, and I think there's a lot of battles in them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine playing the original version of this and going through those and not being like, man, is it over yet? Like, I just want to get through this dungeon. Why are there so many fights? Like, at least with the 3 times speed up, or whatever the multiplier is. I think it was 2 and 4.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that so you can kind of speed past those really basic but also very plentiful just random encounters that you're getting into.
I would say the same thing even for the big, open areas too. Some of them, I mean, are just huge. And I played the game pretty much exclusively with that speed boost given. So, I mean, it felt like a good distance with the speed boosted. Like I felt like, okay, like this feels good. Like it's not too long, it's still not too short because they really are big, robust areas. So even with the speed, it didn't feel like I blew through that area and, a 1 minute's time, it still felt like I was spending a good amount of time out there. So that was definitely a thought in my head while playing this game. Like, man, like the pace of this game must have been super slow. And I know also, I guess sort of a sign of the times too, where it's like you wanted a big 60, 80, 100-hour game, right? Like that was sort of a badge of honor to have an insane amount of hours, especially with these RPGs. So, I could see sort of where that was probably part of their goal too, where it's like, we want these big open areas and it's going to take you a while to get through them.
Well, it's the type of game you want to release at the end of a console life cycle, right? You want to release some longer games because you know that people that aren't upgrading to a PS3 right away, they're going to be looking for games like this to tide them over until they can, maybe there's a sale on the new console or they've saved up enough money or something like that. So maybe FF12 coming out right at the end at kind of the end of 2007, what is it? Keep wanting to say 2016 for some reason. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied here. At the end of 2006 might have been a good time to have a longer, meatier game like this. But yeah, I can't imagine playing through the original version. Because like you, Casey, I did play the whole thing with 4 times speed, and I know David's going to drop us from the Skype call now for saying this, because that's not how you're supposed to play it. But I think that you're right, the areas and the number of battles you get into really lend themselves to playing the game at a faster pace.
Yeah, well, the Gambit system seems almost perfectly designed to play it in fast mode, just because being able to assign tasks to party members. Like, you don't really need to, like, you can just walk up to an enemy and let them do their business. Like, it's just set up perfectly where if you've got a good strategy, especially, it's tougher. The one thing I found is, like, you definitely can't use the speed up on a boss because I find, like, things just unravel quickly. But a lot of the minor enemies in between, like, it was pretty easy just to throw on the quick speed and let everyone just pound on the enemy. I know, like, for me, it was funny. I don't remember how I played it the first time, but I really focused on just physical attacks. And I ended up, with my Gambit system, I was focusing on having everyone attack with their, like, focusing on upgrading the weapons as quickly as possible and picking, like, with the license board, always going for, like, the issuing the attacks. And I really kind of shied away from any offensive magic. I really didn't have anybody that had it. I basically had 2 people that would beat down on the enemies, and then I had 1 healer who was basically just anytime anyone was under 50%, they would just spam the heal and just keep everyone alive all the time. And so, in this game, I actually probably used the speed up more than any of the previous ones, just because in a lot of cases, like you said, and it didn't even really feel sped up in some cases where you're just kind of running across the field because it's so big. So it's to me, it was set up perfect. It's funny that they didn't have it in the original version, the speed up, because it just seems like it was designed
with that
to
in mind.
suit it.
Yeah, it's funny because with the gambit system and the speed up option, I sort of feel like that's ultimately what did me in as far as sort of falling off the wagon, if you will. Because I just got to that point where I was pretty much, when you go back to Final Fantasy VII with the speed up, it was one of those things where it's like battles, outside of big bosses were always in 3 times speed. And then, like, I would always explore an area generally without the speed boost. And then, when it was like, okay, I want to do some leveling, I'm going to put the speed up. Or if I'm retraversing an area I've already been to, like, all right, I already seen this area, right? I can blow through the speed. This game, I pretty much had it on, and I think it sort of hampered especially the battle system, because with the Gambit, it was like, okay, I set up, physical attacks, you're going to heal when you get to this point, or, when the teammates get down to this point, you're going to heal. And it was pretty much just like, oh, I've been speed through, I'm going to encounter these fights, and they're just going to blow through them. And then there were times when I would get to an enemy, and there's one point specifically, I forget exactly where it was, but it was like, you ended up having to face like 2 or 3 of these pretty powerful bosses, or not bosses, but enemies. It wasn't a boss battle. And I was just like, oh man, they absolutely wrecked me. So it's like, I'm just going to go grind for a while. And if I just slowed it down and actually did more like micromanaging, I would probably have been able to overcome them without, spending 2 hours grinding or whatever it was, or an hour grinding. So for me, I feel like I just ended up sort of falling into the habit of like, I'm just going to blow through this. I'm going to let the game sort of play itself. And that's definitely not the way I would recommend playing this game. Like I said, I think that sort of ultimately being the end of me.
You talk about grinding, Casey, and I think that hilariously, this game is probably the one where I've enjoyed grinding the most, because it's just so easy to do. It's so easy to set up a gambit system on your characters or gambits on your characters that work really well for defeating like easy or kind of middling enemies that aren't going to do a ton of damage, that probably you're not really in danger of dying or anything like that. There's also the crystals that refill your health and everything. Like, I think the game is maybe set up very well to kind of power level your characters if you want to, and get a lot of money, and you don't feel like you are ever in a tight spot, unless you want it that way. Unless you absolutely don't want to do any grinding at all, you can maybe make the game a little bit harder for you. But I love being able to kind of mindlessly just mow through enemies at 4 times speed, with strong weapons, and attacking lighter enemies that I don't really need to worry about posing any threat to me. So yeah, I kind of really enjoyed grinding in this game compared to other games where I'm maybe listening to a podcast or doing something else at the same time. The grinding was so fast and efficient here, I could kind of just do that for 10 or 15 minutes and then go on with the rest of the story or whatever I wanted to do next.
Yeah, I can see, like, that's one of the things, like, I guess that would be one of, I don't know if I'd call it a complaint, but I know that it's easy to fall into like a passive role when you're playing, because like you said, if you got your gambit set up, there's not a whole lot of strategy that you need to employ. If you're leveled up high enough, you can just kind of shred through enemies and continue on. And I think the greatest amount of strategic planning really has to come into the bosses.
For sure.
And even then, later in the game, as I got the license board filled up more, I really focused on getting the quickenings. Those were one of the things I wanted to get right off the bat, because I found out early on that quickenings are a good way to really take a huge chunk out of the boss battle. And if you do it in a certain way, like there was a few bosses where I had set it up where I would do the quickening, and I'll explain what the quickening is in a minute, but essentially, so you have the three characters do the quickening, and they've exhausted their output, and then what I would do is I'd swap one person in, activate the quickening, and then in the quickening you can recharge two of the people who you've used, and then you can basically spam the quickening until the boss is like pounded on.
Get that massive damage combo.
Yeah, so I tried. I kind of had to actively stop myself from doing that in some cases, because it's a trap that you can fall into. It's where it's an easy thing to do. It's like once you've kind of got it there, it's a good way to get through a lot of health quickly. But you don't want to fall back on that, because then you can just find yourself becoming a little bored or something like that. But
yeah, I thought that the bosses provided a good challenge. Maybe until you started abusing the quickening system, where you're just comboing them for so much damage that I especially kind of saved them for the end of the fight to try to finish them off. Like I try to just do my own attacks and abilities beforehand, see how tough this is going to be, and then maybe activate a bunch of quickenings in succession so that I could just finish them off. But yeah, it's nice that you don't have to use them. You do have a lot of freedom in how you build up the characters or choose what they're going to be. So maybe this would be a good segue to talking about the class system and the kind of choosing who or what you're going to have in your party.
Yeah. Just before we leave the quickening, I'll just explain what that is. So
sorry.
Each character has basically the abilities of each character are all up to you, because there's a license board for each character in each class, which we'll get into. And as you defeat enemies, you get AP, and that can be attributed to purchasing these abilities. And each character can have a maximum of 3 quickenings. And basically what the quickening would be is, I guess if you played other Final Fantasies and you haven't played this, think Limit Break. It's basically like this powerful move that you can use on the enemy. But the way that it works in Final Fantasy XII is that each character's Limit Break can be multiplied on top of one of the other characters. So each can have up to 3, and it's basically 3 levels of power. So for Balthier, I believe Tides of War is like level 1 quickening. Oh man, I'm blanking on what they're called. They're all very similar. Oh, I'm mad at myself for forgetting that.
You can always edit it in later.
But anyway, there's three levels of attack, and your meter has like 3 meters. So if you use the strongest attack right off the bat, all 3 meters are basically discharged, because you've used the strongest attack. And while that character is performing that attack, the other 2 characters in the party, you can basically pre-select what's going to happen next, and the options are always random. So while Balthier is doing Tides of War, one random option will become available for each of the other 2 characters. And if you don't like the options that are presented, you can
shuffle them.
You only have a few seconds, but you could shuffle them. And on top of having the 3 randomly assigned powerful powers, there's also an option sometimes that comes up where you can recharge those 3 meters like during this whole combat. So early on, when you only have access to maybe 1 or 2, usually the combos end at around 4 or 5 times you can get in. But when everyone has 3, if you've got quick fingers, you could get up to about like 20 like in succession. And the benefit of having more is that on top of multiplying these separate attacks, once you've basically exhausted all of the characters' quickenings, one final blast based on how many multipliers that you were able to achieve hits the enemies as well. So you could have each character doing multiple attacks, and then there's one final big hit right at the end before it goes back to the normal combat. So it's to get those quickly is a good strategy, because in the boss fights they can. You could do with one good quickening, you could take out like 30% of a boss's health.
Yeah, they're almost overpowered a little bit, but it is nice that it's not something you have to use if you don't want to. It's not like a limit break just sitting there necessarily. Like if you don't activate them in the job board and when you for all the characters, then they don't come up, right? Like you have to choose them with your job points or with your license points for it to be an option. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, yeah, that's exactly it. Like if you wanted to focus on getting the abilities first, then you can certainly avoid the quickenings and just get
And
them
they
later
usually
on.
I think they're
require
also
a
pretty
lot.
they're expensive,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I was gonna
Yeah.
say, Case, they're not the cheapest ones on the board. So
Yeah, and this is a good segue to like you said, the class system. So each character is assigned. So in the original Final Fantasy XII, the classes were assigned to the characters already. So you didn't get to choose. But in Final Fantasy, in the Zodiac version on Switch, you actually can choose. So you have 6 party members and 12 classes, and you get to assign 2 classes per character, and you can. It's up to you how you want to do it. And so the different classes basically provide different abilities. So I know for me, I had chosen the Machinist for Balthier. And I had given like the white mage abilities to Pinello. So basically, and there's a battle mage I ended up giving to Ash. So it's you can assign different characters different abilities. I gave the archer to Fran, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
she has to be, right? It almost feels like, I mean, obviously you don't have to. You have that freedom to change it up. But she comes with a bow, right? So it's like, well, she's got to be.
Yeah, and it really affects how you utilize the characters because because Pinello ended up like at the beginning I wasn't really thinking too much of who should get what other than I just was like, well, she feels like a white mage, so I'll give her the white mage powers. But because she was such a strong healer, she was always in my party, and I was always just moving in 2 other characters all the time, like just shuffling through them. But Pinello was a mainstay throughout my entire playthrough.
Yeah, that I will give credit to this game doing an unbelievable job with the party. Like all the characters are so good that you want them all in your party at all times, and then they're so mean that they only let you choose 3. Because I had Ash as like I think she was my black mage, and then is it a time mage was one of the options, or is it like
that's one of them. Yep.
Yep.
I think I had her as my black and time mage, so she was sort of like that. I'm gonna deal damage, right? And then of course, what's her face? Penelope? What was it? Penelope?
Pinello.
That's right.
Pinello.
Jeez, sorry. It's
Yep.
late, I swear. And I haven't played the game in a minute. She was sort of my healer, defuncto healer, and then like, so it's like I wanted to have those 2 in my party at all time, but then of course you needed Balthier and then Van. It's like, oh god, the only one I didn't really care for was like Bosch. It's like, I didn't care if he wasn't in my party as much. But yeah, I had like I tried to get like a nice mix, but I had a bunch of the melee sort of damage dealers. But I was totally just switching in and out and trying to keep everyone more or less around the same level, because it really was fun to have different classes in there, mixing it up a little bit, and then sort of being, oh man, I haven't touched my license board in a while. Let me go and unlock a ton of things, and not sure if I should be going this way or not, but I'm going to anyway. Definitely a little intimidating to start off the license boards.
I was just gonna say the good thing is with the party, it's they do a very good job of being able to just flip on the fly. Like it takes going into the menu just to switch them, but it can be done at any time. Like it can be in battle, as long as they're not performing or receiving like some kind of magical. Like if you're curing someone, you have to wait till the cure is done, or if you're giving them an antidote, like the action has to be complete, but then you can switch them in and out. And then with the license board, like everyone receives the license points, so it does no one character necessarily feels too much overpowered. The only thing is that the leveling up is based on them being active. So I ended up trying to flip people in as often as I could, just so that everyone was leveling up at a consistent rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I try to do something similar. This is one of the carryovers from Final Fantasy X that I think I'm really happy that they were still able to put in this game. In Final Fantasy X, same thing. In battle you can switch out your characters at any time, and I made a lot of use of this in Final Fantasy XII as well, because trying to specialize, trying to keep every character with different abilities or something like that, like having one healer. I did have a black mage because I think it might have been Fran actually, because she seemed to be in tune with like the mist that's in the game or whatever like that. She seemed somewhat magical maybe, and I didn't really need an archer because I had Balthier, or he was the kind of ranged character with the gun he was using. But and correct me if I'm wrong, you do kind of need a black mage for some parts, because there's those flan type enemies that I think they're really resistant
melee
to
attacks, right?
physical attacks, right? Yeah,
Oh,
like
yeah.
you kind of need some magic
I
against
used
them.
my quickenings on them.
That was the worst.
Nice, yeah,
like,
yeah.
son of a bitch. My whole team's melee, and then a healer. It's like, get in here.
I've definitely had situations like that where I needed to boost my magical powers because I ran into some frustrating encounters like that. But I really like the class system here. I played the PS4 version. I haven't played the Switch version yet. And in that one, once you choose your 2 jobs for each character, you're locked into those. You can't go out. You can't make any changes. So I'm curious to hear if you guys made a couple of characters, but then backed out and redid them or remade them. David, did you have any experience with that?
I found out how to do it, but I never actually pulled the trigger on it, because
Okay.
it is pretty easy. There's a character in Rabanaster, and you just go to them and sit and acknowledge that you want to reset the class system. Mm-hmm. And what it ends up doing is it's back to square one, where you can just choose whoever you want to be whatever you want. But the good thing is that like you don't lose the license points. Like they're just given back, so you just you start it over. Yeah. But yeah, it's a pretty simple process to do. But I just felt like I had kind of nailed the setup. Like the only time I think that it would be necessary to reset your license board is if you gave one character 2 separate roles that were important. Yeah. Like if you had, because that was my big thing, is I wanted to make sure I had one strong healer, but there was no real role that it's like, okay, well, like I didn't give Vaughn anything good. Like I gave him, I think he was like the sword user, and that's a lot where I kind of based a lot of my decisions on. It was like, okay, well, what weapons can each class use, so that there's a bit of an overlap. Like I think I can't remember the actual classes I gave to Bosch, but I know like he was using swords and axes and hammers, so that they were all kind of similar weapons. I tried to kind of avoid, like a couple of the characters use like crossbows and arrows and stuff, so I tried to assign those classes to kind of keep them in the same.
Keep the pairings sort of similar.
Yeah. And so I never felt like there was ever a character that was underpowered, or there was a role that was like not being utilized because some other important role was already being used by the same characters. So.
Yeah, I ended up not really changing any of my parties either. I sort of stuck to what I began with. But to me, the weirdest thing about the license boards, and a lot of it is straightforward, like, adds crit damage, or adds life hit points, to extra life pool, that kind of thing. But the gear is so strange to me still. I mean, I understand how it works, but it's just sort of something you definitely need to get your head around, is that you actually need to unlock different gear levels for what the character can wear. So, if you're out in the wild and you find a mage hat or whatever, or whatever piece of gear, you actually need to be able to purchase the license to be able to wear that. So it gets to a weird thing where it's like, all right, I bought gear 1, level 1, I can use these items, and it's like, well, do I want to unlock 2? Well, I don't have any of those items, so I'm going to wait, and then maybe I'll just skip that and unlock 3 when I find, like, because now I've, a little later in the game and I found an item that skips that tier 2 level, it's just sort of strange and definitely takes a little bit of getting used to, especially when it gets into like the accessories, different rings and whatnot. Especially like I believe there's one ring that like doubles, or it might not be doubles. It might just be boosts experience, So it's like, ooh, like I've got one of those rings, and this character is sort of falling behind in levels a little bit. I need to make sure they'd be able to equip this to catch up nice and quick.
Yeah, and there was one ring that halves the amount of MP that's needed, and so I ended up putting that on my healer Pinello to make sure that like
never run out of mana.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was a huge difference too. But yeah, I actually did that myself, where it's like, okay, I've got level 1 sword, and I'm looking at level 2 and level 3 swords, and they're like, yeah, they're a bit of an upgrade, but not enough that I'm going to spend license points to unlock the ability to use them or to pay the money for the weapon. So I was usually jumping like 3 or 4 levels in weapons when I was, especially with like Balthier. Like I had him using the gun, and later on I found a pretty powerful gun, and I think I jumped like 6 or 7 levels to the next one, and I'm like, and that gun ended up being like the most powerful weapon that I had at that point, where like maybe everyone was doing like 500 damage, but like one gunshot from him was doing 2,000. So it was.
I mean, this is the best part of the game, I think. I keep referring to Final Fantasy X, but there are a lot of similarities, and the job where the option that you don't have to go one step up in terms of the weapons. You can wait and put all your points into something that's 5 or 6 steps up, and then you get that huge damage boost, right? Like you have the option to do that, and I love when a game gives you the freedom to determine how you're going to progress or how your characters are going to develop. FF12, I think, does a really, really good job. It's up there, with in the top half of the Final Fantasies for me, for sure. But in terms of the progression and the systems that it uses, in terms of choosing who your character is going to be and making them a certain way, I think it's probably top 3 for me. Like I love that freedom to make the kind of characters you want, give them the abilities you want, the equipment you want. It's a little bit cumbersome because you have to unlock you actually have to get the weapon, or you have to sell your stuff, get the weapon, then make sure you have enough points to open that up on the board. But at least you get all those choices to make, right? Rather than just being forced to use certain things or having to wait a long time or something like that. So I think it's kind of nice.
There's no shortage of choices, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of the system. Maybe we'll just take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll discuss the story and the characters, and talk about what we enjoyed.
Sure.
Alrighty, so we will start with the story. I know I broke it down a little bit about the 2 warring countries and catching the 2 smaller ones in the crossfire. But one of the things that's quite noticeable with Final Fantasy XII is that the story is much more grounded than probably all of the previous Final Fantasies. All the previous 5 Final Fantasies, typically, I think, were all centered around like one potentially world-ending evil that needed to be defeated. Mm-hmm. And Final Fantasy XII was more of like a, I don't know, political story, like more of a,
for sure,
much more grounded story. It was there was not one particular evil that was threatening all of life. This was more about empirical aspirations as opposed to good versus evil.
Yeah, it's definitely got a different tone from, like you said, the majority of Final Fantasy games, and it's almost just pretty much a theme throughout the whole game, right? There's a lot different from Final Fantasy XII than especially from previous Final Fantasies. So it's sort of it takes a different spin, but like I said again, I haven't gotten, haven't seen the conclusion of the story, unfortunately, and I'm not sure as far as like I couldn't even give you a percentage of what I've actually gotten up to, but I did like like sort of the more political driven sort of like, oh, this person's doing this, and then like there are people that are on that side, but it seems like they have sort of different motives as well. And it definitely has a different feel to it, but a refreshing feel.
Well, I think this was the first time that Sid was actually on the bad guy side.
That's right. I think, yeah, I'm trying to think of like all the roles he's played. Like, I mean, he kind of started on the bad side in FF6, but he becomes a sympathetic character when you go to the World of Ruin for sure. But yeah, you might be right. And he's
he was
also
kind of a jerk in 7.
Yeah,
he's the MVP.
Yeah, for sure.
7.
He's on your team, but he's in. Now he's also related to one of the characters. Is that right? He's Balthier's dad, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. There's a lot of like kind of relationships and like family stuff that goes on in this one as well that I don't think you really see in other games. Like, yeah, obviously there's the father-son thing in FF10, but just in terms of like Bosch has a twin brother that plays a big role in the game. Yeah, and then Balthier kind of having that history with his dad and being a former judge and stuff like that, and now he's completely on the other side, right? You see stuff like that too.
Yeah, it's they really went. It seems like they went out of their way of making it clear that it's like there's obviously like the Empire, like they make them out to be the bad guys, but not evil.
No,
like they weren't like clear cut evil. Like there was the obviously like Vane, they were making him out to kind of be like this power hungry dictator. But then, like, as the story developed, you kind of realize that, like, even his motives weren't necessarily out of, like, this lust for, like, there was obvious, like, they certainly make it look like there was some egotism to what he was doing and that sort of thing. But it was clear that there was motives that were not all ill-intentioned.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, just the having all the webs interconnect with how the relationships were, it was, I just felt like it was one, like it wasn't it was complicated, but it was easy to follow, like the story.
Yeah, I think easy to follow is right, David. Like I remember playing it and not feeling like I was out of place or not knowing what's going on, but at the same time I don't know how memorable the story is either. Like I think it's not one that's to me, like I think of all the Final Fantasy stories, and it's one of the games that I've completed in the series, but I don't, and it only a couple of years ago, and I don't remember a lot of the story. I had to kind of refresh my memory about a lot of stuff. So yeah, it's cool that it kind of takes a different stance, and it's not the universe destroying evil that we're used to, maybe, or maybe a super villain like Kefka, who, I mean, he does kind of literally destroy the world. But it is kind of one man just seeking power. We don't get that as much. I feel like this story is more about the horrors of war and what happens when people get kind of caught in the crossfire between warring nations. You know, what happens to the little guys when two bigger powers are at odds with each other. You kind of see, how Damascus is kind of brought into that or occupied and kind of just strewn about. They're kind of like a plaything to the larger powers in the story. So it is a new thing for sure, but yeah, just for my money, I don't know how memorable the story is. I think I probably enjoyed it when I was going through it, but again, 2 years later, I can't tell you that many details about it.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing, is like when you take away kind of the grandeur of the heroes and the villains, it takes away from that memorability, like the memorization. Like same with Sephiroth. Like everyone knows Sephiroth and remembers like he was this big bad who was super powerful, who was gonna bring a meteor to destroy the world and take over the live stream. Like those were all like big memorable moments. And,
for sure.
Yeah, and they don't.
There are a lot more moving
Final
parts,
Fantasy XII
right?
doesn't. Yeah,
yes,
well, that's the thing. There's no. I felt like the pace. I guess the thing with Final Fantasy XII is that the pace is good, the reveals are good, but there wasn't like huge impactful moments.
Yeah, I think I brought it up on the FF9 podcast we did a few months ago. where I said the same thing about Kuja. Like, he's just not memorable, and I think because you don't have that memorable villain, the story ultimately becomes less memorable. Like, I think um, I'm struggling to remember details of FF9's story, even though I really enjoyed that one, probably a little bit more than 12. But yeah, it's these stories that don't have that leading antagonist that makes you want to hate them, to, I guess, to generate that kind of emotion or that kind of anger or yeah, desire to stop them, that maybe makes the story more subdued and enjoyable while you're doing it, but just yeah, kind of at the end of the day, I see FF12 story as probably good, not great, and one that I don't. For me, it's not in my kind of top three, top five Final Fantasy stories for sure. Yeah, just kind of for me, middle of the road, I guess.
Well, even having the lack of like there's a lack of a clear cut villain, but there's also a lack of a clear cut hero.
Mm-hmm.
For sure, yeah.
They all like I know the intention for Square was that I think we were all supposed to look at Vaughn as the hero or the protagonist of the story, but Balthier clearly took that over. Yeah. And it's funny because it to me, I can't remember the first person that brought this up that just hit home to me is like there is a very clear parallel between like Star Wars and Final Fantasy XII because Vaughn is obviously Luke Skywalker and Balthier is Han Solo.
Does that make Fran Chewbacca?
Yes, exactly.
It absolutely yes.
Ash is Princess Leia.
She's Fran's also the one non-human member of the party as well, right? Like, there's obviously no droids or anything, but a lot of the main Star Wars characters are humans. And then you have Chewbacca. He's the one kind of like animal or alien creature on the Millennium Falcon, right? There's a bunch of scenes where like it looks just like Tatooine when the Millennium Falcon is flying away, and you get a scene where I guess they're flying on Balthier's airship. Or they're entering an airship, and the way they fly away reminds me so much of that scene from A New Hope. I wanted to quickly bring up one thing that I remembered from my kind of research from today, and that's that apparently Vaughn was not initially going to be the main character. It was supposed to be Bosch, but because Bosch, he's an older fellow, right? Like I think Square was worried that Bosch wouldn't appeal as much to the audience who'd be buying the game. So that's why they made, I don't know if that's why they made Vaughn at all, but it's why they made Vaughn into kind of what's supposed to be the main character. Yeah, I mean, you start off with him. A lot of the story is kind of told from his point of view, and the problems that are meant to be solved are ones that he's involved in, especially early on. So just kind of a funny thing. We're talking about main characters, and yeah, I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Balthier, but Balthier was not intended to be the main character. It was going to be Bosch, and then it became Vaughn, which is kind of funny.
Interesting. Yeah, and sort of doubling back to the Star Wars thing, just some of like how enormous some of these ships are, especially like the enemy ships getting in and like how they fly away around the city. It totally gives you that Star Wars vibe, which I guess around that time, right? Would have been what 2006. When were the prequels? Around that time, right?
Yeah, you might have a really good point, Casey. Let me.
And then especially you'd think this game was probably in development for quite some time. So it was definitely probably around the resurgence of Star Wars and like, well, let's sort of riff off that, and then of course like what the developers are into at the time sort of, comes through in games generally speaking, right? You're influenced by what's going on around them. So if that was, again, sort of the resurgence of Star Wars, it would totally make sense.
Yeah, so I've got you here, Case. Phantom Menace, 1999, Attack of the Clones, 2002, and Revenge of the Sith, 2005. So yeah, at the beginning of the development of FF12, and then even just a little bit before the release, a year before the release, you've got Star Wars kind of making this huge comeback with the prequels. Not that the prequels were necessarily great. I mean, again, that's something else entirely. But certainly everyone was talking about Star Wars again because they were back in theaters. There was that kind of that high point of their popularity was coming back. And yeah, I'm sure that the developers of this game were not immune to what's going on in pop culture. If everyone's talking about Star Wars, hey, let's design some characters and some set pieces around, and even the story to an extent, around something that's really popular right now, something that's everyone's thinking about.
Yeah, and I bet you there were fans. I mean, I'm willing to
Sure.
go out on a limb and say a lot of developers, video game developers, are nerds just like we are, so they're enjoying these things too. So
I also appreciated that those same ships staying with that the theme of it being grounded. Like there's no guardian forces. Well, there is. I guess there are some there are new guardian forces, I guess, that you end up picking up later on. But the ones that we've come to know are actually like ships. The ships are named after them.
That's right. Right. Yeah, good point.
So the main ship that attacks Rabanastre at the beginning is the Ifrit. There's the Leviathan like comes across as like a star destroyer. And I know like the first ship that gets attacked, I think, is codenamed the Tonberry, and so it was. I thought it was just really neat to see like longtime characters maybe not showing up in the game, but their spirit is still there. Where they're naming ships and destroyers after these powerful forces.
I think that actually made the Espers to me kind of take a back seat because they're all new ones we haven't really seen before. So the ones like I don't really remember any of them. Like I know they're in the game. I know you have to fight them first before you can use their powers to summon them. But to me, they didn't play as big a role in this game as maybe previous ones.
Oh, and I didn't find them as useful. Like what I ended up using them for was when I needed as a last resort. I remember one boss where I had beaten him down to like there was barely anything left. But he had killed all 5 of my 6 characters, so all I had left was Fran, and I'm like, Fran needs help. I remembered assigning her one of it was funny because at the time I wasn't even thinking about it. I was just like, oh yeah, I assigned her one of the Guardian forces, so it came out and essentially just became a sponge.
Yeah, I use them like that too, David. Just a tank. They're just in the way, right? Like, focus on that guy while I heal up, or pull out some of my bigger attacks or something.
Yeah. So I ended up healing Fran enough that when the force left from being beaten up by the boss, I was able to quickly keep bring a couple back to life and then finish them off. So it was. There you go. Yeah, the usefulness was much lower than previous titles. That's did anybody. Well, obviously, I think most of us probably feel that Balthier was the show stealer for the majority of the game.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, he's designed that way. Every time he comes in and starts talking, he's meant to kind of one up or kind of have something witty or charming or funny to say that kind of puts everyone else like, oh, pay attention to him. Like, don't, he kind of downplays everybody else and raises himself up, right? Pretty much. Like every time he comes in, it's like he makes a joke at someone else's expense, or he's always got some kind of really witty or great the writing for Balthier is actually fantastic, and the voice actor's just as good actually. There's one line of his that always sticks with me. I don't know the scene when it's happening. I think they're kind of like captured. They might be on one of the airships or something like that. And he's got a sword pointed at his neck, and it's after the character who's talking to him has just been rambling, and he says to the guy, "Well, at least your sword is to the point." And I'm like, that is such good writing. I'm like, oh my god, like I've never seen that kind of maybe characterization in a Final Fantasy game where I'm like, oh wow, this character is actually brilliantly written. And I've liked other characters before, but Balthier is something else for sure. He's not just one of my favorite characters in a Final Fantasy game. He's one of my favorite video game characters ever. Like even if I don't love Final Fantasy XII, he is someone I will never forget for some of the lines that he's got and his delivery and just the presence that he has. Every time he is on screen, you're paying attention to him. Every time he has something to say, it's like you should listen up because this is probably going to be really good, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to say, right? He's like the guy. But I always love the interaction with Fran, like the two characters together, I think. I mean, like you said, Balthier, it's sort of like no matter what he does is good, right? But I feel like him and Fran had obviously it's meant to they've been traveling together, they've got a good rapport, the chemistry's there, but she was really interesting character to me too, especially when like you sort of learn about how her whole village, right, is they oh, we stick to our own thing. We just sort of live here in the woods, like let everyone else do what they do, and we sort of stick to our thing. And she was sort of ostracized. Oh God, that's the word I'm looking for. Can't speak. From the village because she asked questions and then eventually left. So just I always thought she was super interesting character too, and then I just loved their interactions together, where it's sort of like she does her thing and he's a lot of the times like, well, all right, like yeah, that's what she's gonna do. Like let's do it.
And Balthier makes jokes about her sometimes, but he also always defers to her. Like when Franz says something, he's like, yeah, we should listen to her. She knows what she's talking about. So he clearly has a lot of respect for her, and he makes jokes about everybody. But Fran is one of those characters. Like obviously they have a very close relationship, and he wants everyone else to trust her, or he's trying to get everyone to be okay. Fran is the authority on so many things. When she talks, we need to listen to her. When she says go this way or do this or be careful, she's 100% right about that. So there's that kind of nice deference to her about a lot of issues as well. Even if he's talking and making jokes, when she says something and she's being serious, he's like, okay, yep, we need to take this at face value. Let's trust her. Let's just go with it, right?
Yeah, I just want to mention the actor who actually plays the English, like the English version voice that we hear of Balthier, because I'm looking at his resume and it is impressive. This is the voice actor's name is Gideon Emery. Yeah. He's done a ton. Now he's done he's done some performances in movies. The one I actually think I recognize him in is he was in the first season of the Netflix Daredevil. Okay. As one of the Russians, Anatoly Renskanov. I'm pretty sure I remember his face, but it's more the video game resume that he has that is incredible. So he is going to be Biggs in the Final Fantasy VII remake.
No kidding! Oh, that's so good. Nice, nice.
He's a number of characters in Lego DC Supervillains. He was in Wolfenstein 2 as Fergus Reed. He was in Middle Earth: Shadow of War, Destiny 2, Uncharted.
Who was he in?
Like every Uncharted. Let's see. Uncharted 4, he was just a mercenary. In Lost Legacy, he was Orca. I'm not sure who that is. He was in Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain. He was in Dragon Age Inquisition. He was Samson.
Oh, okay, okay.
He was in Fire Emblem Fates. He was in Call of Duty, Destiny. He was in Skyrim. He was in Final Fantasy XIV, The Last of Us, Fire Emblem Awakening, Assassin's Creed 3, Dragon's Dogma, Diablo 3. Like it is like the amount of stuff here is incredible. Like it's
that's very impressive. I mean, it's clearly someone who knows what they're doing and probably well-respected voice actor in the community. I'm definitely going to have to pay attention to that name now because, there's big names people know like Troy Baker and stuff like that. But yeah, this guy is clearly like a journeyman voice actor in video games, and to know that he's done television as well, that's really neat.
And he's got a distinct name that you can easily pick out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll have to keep our eye on him because, man, he nailed it with Balthier, that's for sure.
For sure.
I guess we should give a little bit of time to Vaughn, who's supposed to be the main character. I didn't. When we first meet him, I certainly was off-put a little bit just because he was kind of like this, brash young guy. But I just feel like by the end of the game, I actually didn't mind him too much because I guess it was more the way he developed with Balthier just became more endearing by the end. But I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like all 6 characters developed well. I think if anything, maybe Penelo was kind of like the R2D2 who was just kind of there for the ride.
She seems very much like the second fiddle to Vaughn, right? Like it's Vaughn, and then like she's like kind of like the little sister type, or she kind of just follows him around. I feel like she's the one who gets captured a bunch and stuff like that. You're going to rescue her rather than like her doing a lot of big things in the story. I don't know that really happens. I think she is kind of just there for better or worse. And maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, Vaughn is funny to me. Like he reminds me a lot of a character like Zidane. from FF9, where yeah, he's kind of brash, he's kind of naive, he's in your face a little bit, kind of happy-go-lucky sort of. It doesn't really seem all that heroic, like he's kind of, again, he's kind of just in the right place at the right time, or wrong place, I guess, as it were. I think Zidane even grows more throughout the story than Vaughn does. I don't really remember a lot of his characterization near the end of the story. David, maybe you can help me out with that. But to me, at the end of the story, it's Ash, we were just talking about him. What's the older fellow's name?
Bosch.
The knight, Bosch. Yeah. It's all these names sound so similar. Ash and Bosch. Like, to me, those are the ones that maybe stand out a little bit more near the end of the story. And Vaughn, yeah, I don't know. I don't know who he becomes by the end. I don't really remember that part.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of becoming Balthier, I guess. To a certain degree.
Yeah.
Because you can really see the kind of mentorship, because at the same time, like, especially at the beginning, like, he was kind of infatuated with the idea of becoming a sky pirate, but not understanding, like, it was to see kind of the honor that Balthier was showing, and you could see that Vaughn was learning things from the situations they were in, but then Balthier was always there to kind of, he would see how a certain situation played out, and then Vaughn would kind of have an idea of, okay, well, this is how it is, and then Balthier would always just kind of be there to be like, well, not everything's what it seems.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he's the role model, right? He's he's a sky pirate, right? And that's what he's always wanted to be, so it sort of makes sense.
Almost a father figure in a way too, right? Like, whenever Vaughn does something wrong or is about to do something stupid, Balthier is always there, be like, no, that's not the right thing, you idiot.
Brakes,
like,
bro.
You got to take your time here, pump the brakes for sure. Yeah.
I love the when they go back to Fran's village, and Vaughn realizes that Fran's not 20.
Yeah, right.
And he asks her, right?
And he's like, yeah, yes, Fran. And then she just walks away, and Balthier looks at him and is like,
yeah,
idiot.
Smooth one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things I remember a lot of the interactions, and but then there's also, like, there gets to a certain point where even Balthier had tells Vaughn, like, that he's going to, like, Balthier, I think, kind of predicts something bad happening, and basically kind of bequeaths his ship to Vaughn near the end, where it's like, if anything bad happens to me, take care of my ship, sort of thing.
That's a very much a Star Wars thing too, right? Like, doesn't Han say that to Lando or something like that when he gets taken away by frozen in carbonite or something like that? Like, again, there's a lot of these things like ownership and possession of these ships. Just reminds me so much of the different Star Wars characters in the Millennium Falcon kind of changing hands and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's definitely, it really felt like, the Han Solo, like, the ship to him was not, like, was as like the value that he placed in the ship as an item, or like being part of him and wanting to make sure that if something happened to him, that someone was taking care of it because it meant that much, sort of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then there's even, like, the modifications that he, like, putting a cloaking system in the ship and that sort of thing. So there's so many parallels to Balthier and Fran being Han and Chewie. Like, it's there's a lot of similarities. Too many to ignore.
I wanted to ask what you guys thought about the judges as kind of like enemies or villains in the game, and what you think they represent or how they worked for you. Like, it definitely felt like something they seemed to be, like, imposing, and like you were always kind of maybe fearful of them, or when they would come into a scene, I feel like it would be, okay, like, shit's getting real right now, like, we got to pay attention to what's happening because there could be, like, a big boss fight coming up. I did feel like they were kind of a cool addition to the game. I'm not sure what you guys thought about them.
Well, the judges, for me, it was kind of funny because I could see a lot of, like, the way things are in politics now, like, because the thing with the judges is, I know at the beginning there was kind of this idea of that the judges were supposed to kind of be impartial, like protectors or stewards of the empire, and you could see like there was a sect that was breaking off, that was kind of siding with Vaughn, and especially later in the game when the because technically that the Empire was like like there was a Senate, like there was a council that was like there was the Emperor, but the council still had power, and then to see the judges, like a section of the judges thirst for power and get into the politics where they were supposed to be impartial, a lot of it kind of mirrored what's going on today in a certain
I was gonna say, yeah, they we all know that's always how it turns out, right? Impartialness to these things.
Yeah, so it was neat to watch, to see, and especially to have it was just another intertwining of like to have Balthier be an ex-judge who basically saw the hypocrisy in what they were doing, and then to have Bosch's twin a judge as well. So there's like it just hammered home more that this isn't good versus evil. Like these are like family squabbles
and more moving parts, right? Just sort of adding to that whole. There's no one overlying big bad to face. That it's just there's a lot going on within the story, and a lot of different motivations for different characters to sort of set different things into motion.
Yeah, exactly. So any other topics of note that you guys think
it's just been too long for me to remember a lot of details about the game. If I had time to play the Switch port, I probably would. But Final Fantasy XII. After I played it again, it definitely became. It went from in my top 10 to my top 5 probably. Like I did enjoy the game, even if I don't think certain parts of it are that memorable. I do think that the ability to grind fast, the 4 times speed option, just the customizability of the characters, and even your experience, right? You can make the characters who you want them to be. There's so many side quests as well to the game. Like you can do the hunts and go after those giant monsters, and some of them they're really cool. I think they're connected to the lore of the world, and I think that maybe some of the harder gameplay is found in trying to prepare for those fights. You have to be really high leveled, have really strong equipment, but also have like really effective gambits set up to take on some of those hunts. So I think it's one area I didn't dive into that much, but if I did go back to the game, I think I would want to try to explore that more. It does seem like there's a lot of side content here once you're done with the story if you want to dive back into it. And of course, I think there's a new Game Plus mode that opens up as well in the Switch version too. So I know I do kind of want to revisit the game, even if it wasn't my favorite. But if I give the story another quick go through, maybe certain parts of it will stick out a little bit more to me.
Yeah, I think for me, if I ever do go back and play this again, and like I said, it really did. The characters are what is the strongest aspect to me of this game. Like you said, the story, it while it's it goes along and I like it. It isn't as memorable as some of the other ones, but the characters really, I think they nailed hit the nail on the head with, developing them and making them very interesting. And like I said, having that dilemma of like, man, I want all of my party members in there. But for me, I would definitely revisit the game without using the speed boost for battles. I think that sort of diminished what was there, and sort of made it trivial to the point where, I would just, instead of actually using tactics, it'd be more about just ramming my head against enemies and watching them die. So that would be, for me, how I would definitely, and anyone who, might consider picking it up or playing it in the future, I would definitely be cautious of not abusing that speed up aspect too much. Obviously, if it's, not your first playthrough, I think that's, more acceptable thing to do. But for me, I think it sort of ended up hurting it more than it did help it.
Yeah, and I agree that the story itself doesn't have the big memorable moments. I think that what was clear to me was that the thing that I noticed is that I never got tired during the playthrough. Like I was staying up late. I was playing every day. I always had that feeling of I want to go, like when I wasn't playing, I was thinking about it, and it kept on going, and there really wasn't a point where I'm like, okay, I need a break for a bit. It was just enjoyable, like, throughout the entire process. And there's only a handful of games that I can say that I had that feeling of, where it's like, I just want to play this. Like, everything else is just noise. I'm focused on this. Like stuff like, I had that feeling with Skyrim. I had that feeling with like Final Fantasy VIII, Dragon Age,
Xenoblade 2,
Star Wars, Xenoblade 2. Like, yeah, there's only maybe like 10 games at most where it's like, I start the game and I'm like completely addicted until the end. Like, there's like I'm playing as much as I can, as often as I can. So yeah, and this is like, and obviously there's a few Final Fantasies that I've done that for, obviously, but not all. Like, there's probably only 3 or 4 that I could say that I was completely engrossed in, and this is definitely one of them. It's hard to definitely in top 5 could be like, it really depends on my mood at any given point of like how far up the top 5 it goes, and it's hard to say, like, to even rank it compared to others, because it's so much different. Like, it's much different than like a Final Fantasy VIII or Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 7. Like, it's just that a different feel to it. So it's close but different. Like, I guess
I think this is my problem with it, actually, is that to me, there's parts of it that are too different. It feels at times like an MMO, especially the combat and the exploration. I really, you know me, I like my turn-based games, right? Like, I like my turn-based RPGs especially. And when it went away from that, and with the Gambit system, where you gotta have to set up like what your AI teammates are gonna do, like, that's just, it's not the way I like. I like my combat to have more freedom and more like pauses where I can make decisions, rather than like kind of just watching stuff unfold. And yeah, it's going to go according to whatever algorithm I've set up, or whatever kind of the Gambit list that I've made. But I don't like to have to keep changing that list, and you have to buy the Gambits, which is annoying, right? You have to open up Gambit slots. Like, to me, that whole aspect of that whole side of the combat really took away from my enjoyment of the game, actually, which is why I just kind of did power grinding at 4 times speed, and I tried to make the combat as easy as I could. And even the boss battle, like, the boss battles were fun because I was spending more time giving actual actions to, or determining my actions for my characters manually, using the quickenings and stuff like that. But for smaller bosses, or for just normal battles, I just wanted to rush through them and get to the next story beat. I think I did really enjoy this game when I played it, but just looking back, there's only a few things that really stand out to me. Whereas I think in other Final Fantasy games, like I said, there's all these big huge moments and character events that take place that I will never forget, regardless of when I played them. FF12 just didn't have that as much for me. I do like the characters, I like the progression system, but there's enough wrong, or enough that I don't like about the combat system and the Gambit system, that it kind of detracts the most for me, I think.
Cool. Well, I think that's gonna cover it for our Final Fantasy XII coverage. If you are a regular listener and are starting to wonder when the Final Fantasy talk's gonna end, you will get a break from it, I think.
Well,
for
next
a little
week's
while.
Final Fantasy 1, right?
Yeah. Don't tempt me, Casey. I'm already teetering on that ledge. It wouldn't take much to push me off. Yeah, I think the next one will be Final Fantasy VIII, and since we don't even have a release date yet, it's probably going to be later in the year. Luckily, it's still 2019 as far as we know. It seemed like from what they showed us at E3 that the game's probably close to done, if not already. So we can look forward to that in the future, but I think coming up we're going to have a focus on Fire Emblem with the Fire Emblem 3 Houses for Switch coming out at the end of July. Our next episode will be a look at the Fire Emblem titles, and I believe Casey's going to be on that episode with us. And I think we're going to lose Jordan for an episode or two.
He said he hates
with
Fire Emblem and everyone that plays it.
No, please don't. I really like Fire Emblem, and I actually do hate to miss that episode because it's a series that I've loved since it came out on the Game Boy Advance, and I continue to hope we get more and more of those games. I'm really looking forward to that Switch game coming at the end of July as well. So I'll be back to talk about Three Houses for sure when we've gone through that all together. But I think that's going to be later in August. Is that right, David? We'll talk about it maybe mid to late August.
Yeah, with it coming out late July, we'll need a few weeks to get through it. So, I would probably say it's our end of August episode for the review episode of Three Houses. But
right,
yep.
So maybe what about something retro for the beginning of August? Or I don't know if you have anything else in mind. We've got this kind of Fire Emblem series look for the end of July, but maybe that first episode in August we could do something. Go back to the well or go a little bit old school maybe. I don't know what you have in mind.
Yeah, that would work. I guess we have a few different options. I guess it'll depend. Maybe we'll leave it open if anyone wants to send us a message on via email or Twitter to give us an idea. I have a few things that I actually picked up that are old. I picked up the original Fallout.
Oh yeah, okay. On PC.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. I've only played about an hour, but I thought it was pretty neat. It's the reason I picked it up, like I obviously enjoyed the Fallout series, but when Fallout first started, it was more of an isometric point and click, similar to Wasteland, Wasteland 2, which I reviewed on Switch. Although much older,
a little more primitive.
So it doesn't. Yeah, a little more primitive. So maybe something like that. But it'll with the next episode not too far away. It might need to be something that I've actually gotten through already. So we'll leave that open for if you guys have any suggestions or if any of the listeners want to send in. The email you can send it to is david@thethirstymage.com. Or you can look us up on Twitter @TheThirstyMage. And so if you have anything that you'd like to recommend, feel free. I can even tell you that one of the listeners, I didn't need much of a push to talk about Final Fantasy XII, but we were on the fence if we were going to actually cover it just because we've done so many Final Fantasies. So to have a listener request it,
you could be that little nudge we need.
That's right. Sometimes all it takes is a little nudge if you want to get a game topic in. And
if you want to get Casey to spend
please, $40. That's right. Yeah. Well, we certainly do want to do that. Yeah, honestly, if you're listening, please let us know what games you want to hear us cover, especially if they're older games that maybe we haven't played before or haven't played in a long time. It's always nice to hear from people and see what the audience is looking forward to hearing us talk about. So, there's games that maybe we aren't even thinking about or that we've totally forgotten about that would be really fun to revisit too. So, yeah, please, send David an email or hit us up on Twitter. Let us know that don't Casey. You can't even joke about that because one day some sicko is going to email us and be like, "Oh man, I would love to hear you guys talk about Quest 64," and it's going to be Casey just with some fake email address that he's created, right? Oh, and he's also mysteriously sick that episode, so he bails on us.
About, man?
And it's just
I'm
me and David.
Quest 64.
Are you really? Oh, stop it! We got to stop this right now. Stop the Quest 64
one day,
talk.
It's going to be like
David. You got to.
I don't know. It'll have to be like April.
You gotta cut all this out of the podcast.
Like, it'll just be a big joke on ourselves. Like, yep, we actually played Quest 64.
That's honestly, that's not even a horrible idea to do it for like an April Fool's episode. Like, maybe tell people we're gonna do, I don't know, some actual good game, and then they download it and it turns out to be the Quest 64
it'll be the Chrono Trigger
episode. That'd be pretty funny.
Everyone will be like, wow, I love Chrono Trigger.
That's
I can't wait to talk and hear about that. And then it's like,
I'll do you one better case. We'll tell Neil it's the Chrono Cross episode. And then we'll spring Quest 64 on him. Yeah, that's right. There we go.
Perfect.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll tell him that he can't come on unless he completes it.
Yeah,
100%.
Exactly. That's gotta be bloody agony. Game is so terrible.
That'll be punishment for something one day.
No doubt. It was almost punishment on our Talk Nintendo predictions. Unfortunately, I narrowly avoided it, but
it's a damn shame.
Close.
It's a damn shame.
Yeah. Maybe next year, Case. Hell, maybe next Nintendo Direct.
Yeah,
we'll
we'll throw
see.
down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for listening, and thank Jordan and Casey for joining me on this late July 4th extravaganza to discuss the more Final Fantasy.
Well, it's a pleasure.
And
we promise we're taking a break. So thanks for, if you're not a huge Final Fantasy fan, hopefully you've enjoyed maybe hearing some different takes on some of the games. But yeah, we promise we are going to take a break at least for a few months and see what else see what else is coming down the pipe.
Yeah, it's always good to get some variety in. So yeah, we'll get some Fire Emblem Moon next week, and we'll see after that. So. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and if you haven't subscribed already, make sure to subscribe on your pod player of choice. And if you have anyone who's into RPGs as much as you, and you're not sure if they've listened to the show or not, feel free to let us know. And finally, if you have a moment and can give us a rating on that pod player, whether it's like iTunes or Google or Spotify, we have a. We're slowly expanding throughout Europe and on the Spotify. So we've left the Netherlands. We've moved up to Sweden, and I believe we even have one Great Britain listener now. So we're taking over Europe. Yeah, that's what Spotify is.
The conquest has begun.
I think if I'm not mistaken, I think Pimm's is a liqueur that is either it was invented in London or it's certainly from Great Britain. So maybe the shout out to Pimm's will get us a few more UK listeners.
Yeah, same with the barley wine. So
there you go. Yeah.
If you're in England, have a barley wine, subscribe to the pod, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, you're almost obligated to do that actually, so you might as well just go and do it now.
That's right. Make sure it's double-digit alcohol content.
Yep.
All right. Have a good night.
See you guys later.
Good night.